the town of Harborsend, a small coastal enclave nestled in the northern reaches of Oregon, had always lived in harmony with the sea. The scent of brine clung to the air, the sound of waves became a natural lullaby, and the rhythm of tide and fog shaped the local lives like clockwork. For Miles Harper, however, that once familiar rhythm now echoed only loss. It had been exactly 8 months since he stood at the edge of the same worn dock, waving goodbye to his wife, Lila, and their 10-year-old daughter, Clara, as they set off on what was supposed to be a peaceful mother-daughter fishing trip. The memory of that morning was etched into Miles's heart like a scar that refused to fade. Lila's laughter had rung out over the clinking of their gear, her voice firm and bright as she ensured they had packed everything. Clara, full of boundless energy, had worn her brand-new fishing vest, one Miles had given her for her birthday, and had bounced on her heels in pure excitement, swinging her little rod proudly. "You sure you can't come, Daddy?" she had asked, her big blue eyes looking up at him with a mix of hope and disappointment. "I promised Mr. Dalka I'd help repair his deck today, sweetheart," Miles had replied, tousling her hair. "But you and Mommy will have a great time. She'll take you to that secret spot she found last summer. You remember, where she caught that giant striped bass." Lila had winked at him, already climbing onto their small boat. "We'll bring dinner," she had promised. "We'll be back before the weather changes." That line, "before the weather changes," haunted Miles now. The morning forecast had predicted light showers in the afternoon. Nothing unusual. Yet, within hours the skies had turned ominous, and by evening, a full-blown storm had ravaged the coastline with a fury even the oldest seaman of Harborsend hadn't seen in decades. That storm, sudden, violent, and unforgiving, had swallowed Lila and Clara without warning. In the frantic hours that followed their disappearance, the local Coast Guard, volunteers, fishermen, even private search crews from neighboring towns had mobilized. The community, small and tightly knit, refused to accept the loss. For days, boats combed the stormy waters, while helicopters scoured from above. Divers explored wreckage zones and coves. But 3 days later, the tide brought in its own grim report. Debris from Lila's boat washed ashore, part of the hull, splintered and battered, Clara's small red life vest, and Lila's distinctive waterproof bag. One Miles had bought for her on their anniversary trip to Newport. Most heartbreaking of all was Clara's fishing hat. It had a cartoon trout stitched on the front and her name, Clara H., written in permanent marker beneath the brim. That hat had been found wedged between jagged coastal rocks near Falcon Point. That was when the official story crystallized. The boat had capsized in the storm. The mother and daughter were presumed drowned. But Miles hadn't accepted it. Not really. Not entirely. Something inside him, some stubborn, aching part, refused to let go. He'd clung to the hope that they had survived, that maybe they'd reached land, that maybe they'd been stranded, injured, or even found by someone who hadn't yet come forward. Desperate to believe in another possibility, Miles had focused on one remote chance: Birch Hollow Island. Just under 16 miles off the Harborsend coast, Birch Hollow was known for its rugged, forested terrain and lack of permanent residents. Occasionally, adventurous teens sailed out there for weekend campfires or exploration, but for the most part, it remained untouched. The search parties had covered it briefly, but the terrain was difficult, and weather conditions had cut their efforts short. Miles had gone back on his own, again and again, week after week, month after month. Every Saturday, no matter the weather, he'd launch his boat and return to Birch Hollow and the surrounding archipelago. He learned the currents, the shallows, the reefs. He memorized tides. He even took up amateur diving just to explore the submerged cliffs, where the current could have dragged debris or bodies. People whispered. He knew it. He heard the things they said at the market, at the dock. The poor man hasn't moved on. He's chasing ghosts. He should let them rest. But how could he? When nothing felt final. When no body had been found. No remains? Just items, washed up like flotsam, lacking the one thing he needed most: certainty. That morning, like every other, Miles had stood on the same weathered dock in Harborsend, the scent of salt water and diesel filling his lungs as he prepared his gear. The wind had picked up early, and the gulls squawked overhead. The marina, once a source of solace, now mocked him with its silence and memory. He pulled his coat tight and looked out at the endless ocean, an expanse that had once been a place of joy for his family, now transformed into a graveyard of what-ifs. What he didn't know then, as he prepared for yet another lonely search, was that something had shifted. Somewhere beyond the horizon, fate was stirring. And soon, a phone call would come that would change everything. Miles Harper had just finished securing the last strap on his oxygen tank when his phone buzzed against the side pocket of his waterproof vest. The screen lit up with a number he recognized instantly: Harborsend Police Department. His stomach clenched. In 8 months, they had never called him directly. He stared at the name, heart pounding, before finally pressing accept. "Mr. Harper," came the voice of Officer Damian Riley, the younger of the 2 coastal officers Miles had worked with during the early days of the search. "Are you at the marina right now?" "Yes," Miles said, his voice tight. "I was about to head out." "Why?" There was a pause, just long enough for Miles to hear the hesitation in the officer's voice. "We need you to come down to the station. There's been a development regarding your family's case." For a moment, Miles couldn't breathe. A development? What kind of development? "A local fisherman came in this morning. He saw something during his route near the old lighthouse. It's better if we talk in person. He's still here." "I'll be there in 10, Miles said, already stripping off his gear. His hands trembled as he changed clothes, every movement jerky with adrenaline. He didn't allow himself to hope, not yet. There had been false leads before, claims of sightings, washed-up articles of clothing mistaken for Clara's. But something in Riley's voice, controlled but urgent, made it feel different this time. Within minutes, Miles was pulling into the compact lot outside the Harborsend police station, a building no larger than a coffee shop but the nerve center for the coastal area. Officer Riley met him at the door, face taut but composed. "Mr. Harper, thank you for coming so quickly." "Just tell me," Miles said, breath catching. "What happened?" "Come inside." Riley led him to a small meeting room. At the table sat another officer, Officer Livenson, and beside him a wiry, middle-aged man with sun-darkened skin and salt-gray hair. Miles recognized him instantly. "This is Rory Delgado," Riley introduced. "He's a ferry operator for the Marine Research Team on Cove Island." "Mr. Harper," Rory said, standing to shake his hand. I hope I'm not giving you false hope, but I saw something this morning that I couldn't ignore." Miles gripped the man's hand, sensing the strain in his eyes. "What did you see?" "I take supply runs to the research post 3 times a week," Rory began. "On my way back today, I cut across the old shipping lane near Hollowstone Lighthouse. Saves me time if the weather's good." He paused. It was foggy. Visibility wasn't great. "But as I passed by the dock near the lighthouse, I saw a girl standing there." Miles felt like the air had been punched from his lungs. A girl. She looked young. Maybe 11? Blonde hair, red jacket. She waved at my boat. Just stood there on the dock, waving. Riley leaned in. Rory didn't connect it right away. But when he got back to town and saw one of the missing person posters, the ones with Clara's photo, he realized the resemblance was uncanny. Miles turned to Rory. "You're sure it was a girl? You weren't imagining things." "I've been on the water most of my life," Rory replied. I know the difference between fog shadows and a person, and I swear to you she was real. The lighthouse, Miles said slowly. Hollowstone's abandoned. Yes and no, Livenson spoke up. It was decommissioned 20 years ago, but it was bought by a private citizen, Malcolm Vire. Lives alone, apparently. No official visitors on record. Do you have a number for him? We tried, Riley said, glancing at the paper in front of him. The line was disconnected. Then we go there, Miles said, rising to his feet. We check it out. I've already requested a patrol boat, Riley replied. We'll take Rory with us. He knows the route better than anyone. If there's a child there, we're not waiting. Within the hour, they were back at the docks, loading onto a patrol boat. Rory manned the wheel, flanked by Riley and Livenson, while Miles sat rigid near the bow, staring at the fog-shrouded horizon. Every wave that struck the hull echoed like a heartbeat in his chest. The closer they got to Hollowstone, the tighter his chest became. At last, through the lifting mist, the outline of the lighthouse emerged, tall and ghostly, rising from a jagged reef like a forgotten monument. Rory pointed. That's where I saw her, right on that dock. As the boat approached, Miles's breath caught. Pulled up beside the dock was a small, damaged boat, its hull cracked, clearly unusable. That wasn't here before, Rory murmured. Not when I passed last week. Riley nodded to Livenson. Secure us. They docked and disembarked. Miles's boots thudded against the old wood as he scanned the lighthouse's base. The door was locked. Riley knocked. Coastal police. Anyone inside? No answer. He knocked again. Still silence. Then, the sound of a motor. Another boat approached from the other side of the reef. A man piloted it, his weathered face set in a surprised frown as he slowed and pulled up. Can I help you? Riley stepped forward. Are you Malcolm Vire? The man hesitated. I am. We received a report of a child seen here this morning. Vire raised an eyebrow. That must have been my niece. She visited me this morning to help collect some belongings. She's back on the mainland now. Do you have a photo of her? Livenson asked. Vire seemed reluctant, but finally pulled out his phone, flashing an image of a girl with short blonde hair in a red jacket. Satisfied? He asked coldly. Riley turned to Rory. Could this be the girl? Rory squinted. Could be. But I wasn't close. The fog, it's hard to say. Miles stared at the photo, hope flickering. Something about the girl's eyes. The posture. She always wore her hair in braids, he murmured. Lila would never have let her cut it. Vire stiffened. I don't appreciate being accused. No one's accusing you, Riley said calmly. But we'd like to look around. Just to be thorough. Vire hesitated, then nodded slowly. Fine. But don't touch anything. This is private property. He led them toward the lighthouse door, unlocking it with a large iron key. The metal creaked open, revealing a dim, dust-laced interior. But Miles noticed immediately. Dust had been disturbed in several spots. And worse still, near the spiral staircase, leaning in the corner, was a child-sized fishing rod with a familiar silver reel. That's Clara's, Miles whispered. That's her rod. And with that quiet declaration, the fragile glimmer of hope inside him burst into a blaze. The moment Miles Harper's eyes landed on the child-sized fishing rod leaning against the wall, the breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just the size or the style. It was the silver chrome reel, the way the line had been wound, the slight chip in the red handle. He had bought that exact rod for Clara's 10th birthday, had spent hours teaching her how to cast from the end of their dock. That rod should not be here. That belongs to my daughter, Miles said quietly, his voice taut. I gave it to her a week before she disappeared. Malcolm Vire turned toward him, his expression unreadable. There are many rods like that on the market, he replied coolly. "You're mistaken." "I'm not," Miles said firmly. "That chip on the grip? Clara dropped it on the boat deck the day she got it. I glued it back myself." Officer Riley stepped in. "Mr. Vire, may we take a closer look?" Malcolm hesitated, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Riley carefully lifted the rod, examining it under the lantern's dim light. "This isn't an ordinary model," he said, noting the unique features. "Mr. Harper, is your daughter's name engraved anywhere on this?" "No," Miles replied. "But open the tackle box next to it. There should be a green plastic bobber with the initials CH drawn on with a red Sharpie." Livenson opened the small tackle box sitting nearby and rummaged through the contents. His hand paused, then slowly drew out a bobber, its worn plastic still faintly showing the faded red letters. CH. The room fell silent. Malcolm Vire's jaw clenched. "I told you. I find things washed ashore. I collect them. I thought nothing of it." "That rod didn't wash ashore," Miles snapped. "It was inside a locked lighthouse." "You've been lying." "Calm down," Riley said quickly, stepping between the two. "Mr. Vire, is there anything else in this building that might have come from the wreck?" Malcolm's lips pressed into a thin line. "Just a few items. A hat. Maybe a jacket. I stored them downstairs." "Show us," Livenson said, his tone brooking no argument. Malcolm hesitated once more, then turned toward a narrow metal door near the rear of the room. "This way." He led them to the storm cellar, a small, windowless chamber beneath the main level. As he unlocked the heavy door, the hinges groaned, and a cold draft escaped from within. The bulb overhead flickered as Malcolm descended the narrow stairs, followed by the officers and Miles. The room was cluttered, old furniture, boxes, crates labeled with various years. At the far end, a tall wooden cabinet stood against the wall, its door partially ajar. Malcolm moved to stand directly in front of it. "Everything I found is in here," he said quickly, his body half shielding the cabinet. Miles narrowed his eyes. "Move." "This is private property," Malcolm growled. "You've no right to go through my personal things." "Sir," Riley interjected, "this is a missing persons investigation. If you're holding evidence, it's not evidence." Malcolm snapped. "It's salvage. Nothing more." "Step aside," Riley ordered, his voice hardening. For a moment, Miles thought Malcolm might refuse. But with a sharp breath, he moved back. Riley opened the cabinet slowly. Inside, among the cluttered shelves, lay a pale cream-colored hat with subtle stitching around the brim. Stitching Miles recognized instantly. Lila had added that pattern herself, her favorite sun hat. He reached for it, his hands trembling. "This is Lila's," he whispered. This proves she was here." Malcolm stepped forward. "I told you I found it, washed up on the rocks near the eastern cove." "And you just kept it?" Miles asked, anger surging. "Why didn't you report it?" "Because people here don't ask questions," Malcolm snapped. "They gossip. They pry. I value my solitude." "You valued it more than helping a grieving husband find closure?" Riley asked, eyes narrowing. "What else are you hiding?" Malcolm's eyes darted toward the cabinet, then to the floor. Livenson noticed something near the bottom corner of the cabinet, a small fishing toolbox, the old metal kind with rusted hinges. "Whose is this?" he asked. "Mine," Malcolm said quickly. "Been in my family for years." "May I open it?" "No, why not?" "It's personal." Livenson crouched, unlatching the toolbox before Malcolm could object. Inside were various fishing tools, hooks, pliers, and underneath, carefully folded, was a red windbreaker with a torn left sleeve. Miles gasped. "That's Clara's. She wore it the day they left." Malcolm was growing visibly agitated. "You don't understand. You think you do, but you don't." "Then explain," Livenson said evenly. Tell us what you're not saying." Malcolm's hands trembled as he backed toward the stairs. "I didn't hurt them. I swear it." "Them?" Riley caught the slip. "You mean Lila and Clara? You just admitted they were here." "I found them after the storm," Malcolm said, eyes wide. "They were hurt, scared. The boat was gone. I helped them. I fed them." "Then where are they now?" Miles demanded. "Where's my daughter?" Malcolm shook his head. I can't talk here. It's not safe." "Not safe." Live and Son repeated. "From who? You're the only one here." "Not anymore," Malcolm muttered, voice almost a whisper. "They'll come. They always do when the light's out." Miles's pulse pounded. "You're not making sense. Are they alive?" Malcolm said nothing. He stared past them, toward the darkness beyond the cellar stairs, as if expecting someone or something to appear. "You're coming with us," Riley said. "We'll talk at the station." "No," Malcolm turned sharply. "I'll tell you everything, but not here." He lunged for the stairs, but Live and Son moved faster, grabbing his arm. Malcolm struggled, but not with the strength of someone intent on escaping, more like someone crumbling under the weight of his own unraveling secrets. "Let's get him topside," Riley said, "and call him back up. We're going to need it." As they emerged into the fading daylight, Miles felt the weight of the cream-colored hat in his hands. Proof. Real, tangible proof. Lila had been there. Clara too. But where were they now? And what other horrors did this lighthouse still conceal? As Malcolm Byers sat restrained in the patrol boat, silent and stone-faced, Officer Riley radioed for additional units and a forensic team to be dispatched to Hollowstone Lighthouse. Live and Son stood beside Miles Harper on the dock, holding the cream-colored hat in a sealed evidence bag. Miles had given it up reluctantly, but he knew it was necessary. He stared at the lighthouse, its weathered facade hiding more than just cobwebs and broken windows. "That man is hiding something," Miles muttered. "I don't believe for a second that he just found those items." Live and Son nodded grimly. "Neither do we. We're going to dig into his past, see what we find. You did good today, Mr. Harper. Those rods, that hat, this changes things." But Miles wasn't satisfied. Not yet. The fishing rod and the hat were clues, yes, but they weren't answers. Clara was still missing, and until he saw her with his own eyes, he wouldn't rest. When they returned to Harborsend, Riley and Live and Son escorted Malcolm into the station for formal questioning, while Miles waited outside. He couldn't sit still. Instead, he found himself wandering toward the docks, his mind spinning with everything they had uncovered. That's when he remembered something, a conversation from earlier that day at the Silver Anchor Tavern. Doug, the bartender, had mentioned something peculiar. Malcolm had supposedly been seen around the inlet channels behind the main harbor, where the reeds were tall and the water shallow. Locals rarely went there. Miles pulled out his phone and called Rory Delgado. The fisherman picked up on the second ring. "Miles? Everything okay?" "I need your help," Miles said without preamble. "Meet me at the marina in 20 minutes. It's urgent. I think Malcolm lied about where he's living." Rory didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." True to his word, Rory arrived promptly. The two men climbed into Rory's small but sturdy fishing boat, one designed to navigate narrow water passages. As they moved away from the busy harbor and toward the quiet maze of inlet channels, the city sounds faded, replaced by the rustle of reeds and the occasional call of a heron. "Not many folks come back here," Rory said as he steered the boat into a particularly narrow channel, tree branches arching overhead like skeletal fingers. "Too easy to get stuck or lost." "Perfect place to hide something," Miles replied. They traveled in silence for nearly half an hour, navigating the twisted network of waterways. Then, as they rounded a bend, Rory cut the engine and pointed ahead. "There," he whispered. Miles followed his gaze. Nestled against a rocky outcrop was a large, weathered houseboat tethered to a small, hand-built dock. Beyond that, perched higher on the rocks, was a wooden cabin partially hidden by dense foliage. It looked abandoned at first glance, but smoke curled faintly from a stovepipe. "He's here," Miles whispered. "This is where he's been keeping her." Rory pulled the boat into a patch of reeds, hiding them from view. They watched the property from their concealed position, hearts pounding. After a few minutes, movement caught their eyes. Malcolm Vire emerged from a cabin. The same man who had just been escorted away in a patrol boat was now walking freely along the dock. "What the?" Rory muttered. "How is he here?" Miles's blood turned cold. "That's not possible. He's supposed to be in custody." "Unless that was a diversion," Rory said grimly. "Unless he has someone helping him." As they watched, Malcolm disappeared into the boathouse, only to re-emerge moments later carrying what appeared to be a small figure over his shoulder. Blonde hair spilled from beneath a hood. Miles grabbed the binoculars Rory offered and focused in. His breath caught. "It's Clara," he whispered. "It has to be." The girl appeared limp, unconscious or sedated. Malcolm carried her down to the dock and into the houseboat, then went back to the cabin. When he returned, he had a large duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a heavy-looking cooler in his other hand. He loaded them onto the houseboat and returned once more with another cooler. "He's preparing to leave," Miles said, his voice shaking. "We have to do something." Rory reached for his radio but found only static. "No signal back here. We'll need to move closer to the main harbor to get a call through." "Do it," Miles said, "but don't lose sight of this place." As Rory slowly backed them out of the channel, a twig snapped underfoot on the dock behind them. Malcolm's head snapped up. He stared directly toward the reeds. "He heard us," Rory whispered. Then Malcolm reached into his jacket and pulled out a handgun. Without warning, he fired into the water, the bullet sending a plume of spray into the air just yards from their boat. "Get out," Miles hissed. They ducked low as Rory throttled the engine, veering them behind a curve of the channel and out of sight. Another shot rang out, then silence. They didn't stop until they reached an area with clear signal. Miles immediately called Officer Riley. "We found him," he said breathlessly. "He's not at the lighthouse. He's in the inlet channels behind the harbor. I saw him. He has Clara." "Are you certain?" Riley asked, already shouting commands in the background. "Positive. And he's armed. Send backup. Now. Units are en route. Stay hidden. Do not engage." Miles looked at Rory. "Help's coming. We just have to keep him in sight." They turned the boat around, creeping back toward the hidden compound. From a safe distance, they watched as Malcolm loaded the final items onto his boat, moving with frantic urgency. The sound of helicopters grew louder in the distance. Moments later, police boats appeared at the mouth of the channel, sirens flashing. "Malcolm Vire," a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Drop your weapon and surrender." On the dock, Malcolm froze. He turned slowly, hands still at his sides. Then, in a sudden move, he tossed the gun into the water and raised his arms. Officers swarmed the dock. Miles and Rory approached cautiously. As they neared, one officer stepped forward. "Mr. Harper, please stay back. We've secured the area." "Where's Clara?" Miles asked. "Is she safe?" "We're retrieving her now," the officer said. Moments later, a medic emerged from the houseboat carrying a small figure wrapped in a silver thermal blanket. The blonde hair was unmistakable. "Clara," Miles choked. He moved forward, only to be stopped by another officer. "She's being taken to the hospital immediately," the officer said gently. "She's stable, but we need to get her evaluated." "Let me go with her," Miles pleaded. "I'm her father." The officer nodded, signaling to the medics. "Come on." As Miles climbed into the emergency boat beside his daughter, he felt a wave of emotion crash over him. Relief, disbelief, and grief all at once. He reached out and held Clara's hand. It was small and cold, but it squeezed his fingers weakly. "Daddy," she whispered. "I'm here," Miles said, tears streaming down his face. "You're safe now, baby. I've got you." As the emergency boat carrying Miles Harper and his daughter Clara cut through the still waters back toward Harborsend, the surrounding darkness seemed to part just enough to allow hope to slip through. The rhythmic hum of the motor was the only sound as Miles held tightly onto Clara's hand, his other arm wrapped gently around her fragile frame. She was barely conscious, her skin pale, her breath shallow, but she was alive. Every few moments her eyes fluttered open, and Miles whispered reassurances, promises that she was safe now, that he would never leave her again. At Harborsend Memorial, Clara was immediately rushed into the emergency ward. Doctors and nurses surrounded her, checking vitals, administering 4 fluids, and drawing samples. Miles wasn't allowed to follow her into the examination room, and the minutes spent pacing in the waiting area felt like hours. Eventually, Dr. Anjali Patel emerged, her face tired but calm. "Mr. Harper," she said, motioning him into a private consultation room. "Clara is stable. She's suffering from malnutrition, likely due to a restricted diet over an extended period of time. She has a mild respiratory infection, likely from poor ventilation, but we're treating it. There are traces of sedatives in her system, nothing we can't manage. The most important thing is she's safe now, and we expect a full physical recovery." Miles let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "Thank you," he whispered. "Can I see her?" "Soon," Dr. Patel replied gently. "She's resting, but we'll move her to a private room shortly. I do want to prepare you. This is only the beginning. Clara will need long-term psychological support. She's endured a severe trauma. We've called in Dr. Morgan, our pediatric trauma psychologist. She'll begin working with Clara as soon as she's strong enough." Miles nodded, gripping the armrest of the chair. "Whatever it takes. Just help her heal." Back at the inlet compound, law enforcement had descended on the site like a swarm. Search and forensic teams combed through every inch of the cabin and the boathouse. Malcolm Vire had been placed under arrest and transported to a secure holding facility. What investigators found in the hours that followed would send shockwaves through the town and through Miles. Officer Riley met him at the station the next morning. Miles hadn't slept. He had spent the night at the hospital, holding Clara's hand, watching her sleep, trying to will the horror away. "We've gone through most of the site," Riley said, leading him to a private conference room. "I need to warn you, what we found is disturbing, but you have a right to know." Miles braced himself as Riley laid out a series of photographs and reports. "We found 2 large cooler boxes in the boathouse," Riley began, his tone professional but laced with disgust. "Inside were preserved human remains, severed parts stored in jars filled with formaldehyde. They were labeled with names and dates." Miles stared in disbelief, his stomach twisting. "Are you saying we believe your wife was killed just before we arrived?" Riley said gently. "Her remains were among those found. We're still waiting on forensic confirmation, but based on your earlier descriptions and the personal items recovered, there is no doubt." Miles closed his eyes. A sob escaped him, strangled and hollow. "He killed her. After all this time, he kept her alive for months," Riley said, voice thick. "Our medical examiner believes she may have been killed within hours of our arrival. It's possible he realized he couldn't keep both of them anymore, especially after Rory spotted Clara at the lighthouse." Miles couldn't speak. Rage burned in his chest, hot and consuming. Why? Why do all this? That's where it gets even darker, Riley said. We found Malcolm's journals. Dozens of them stacked on shelves, filled with handwritten entries. He had a philosophy, a belief system. He saw himself as a preserver of what he called maternal sanctity. He believed time corrupted relationships, that society tore families apart. In his deluded mind, he was saving these mothers and daughters from chaos, from change. He was building a fantasy, Miles whispered, horrified. Yes, Riley confirmed. He staged scenes. We found a photo album, pictures of his victims, dressed in specific outfits, posed in family settings. Dinner tables, reading corners, birthday setups. He recreated moments he claimed to have lost when his own wife and daughter died in a ferry accident 15 years ago. He was trying to rebuild them, Miles said, understanding dawning like a punch to the chest. Recreate what he lost. Exactly. And when the illusion started to break, when one of the mothers resisted or the daughters cried too much or people started asking questions, he ended it. Preserved what he called their purity. We believe at least 3 other mother-daughter pairs were taken over the past 10 years. All missing persons cases from other coastal towns, all unsolved, until now. Miles stared at the photographs, the evidence bags, the cold facts spread out on the table. So he wasn't just hiding them. He was keeping them, like dolls in a display. Yes, Riley said, except Clara. She was still alive because of your wife. Lila fought to keep her alive. She must have cooperated just enough to avoid provoking him. She protected Clara every single day. She sang to her, Miles said quietly. Clara told me. Lila sang to her every night. Riley swallowed hard. We found a cassette player in the boathouse. Tapes marked with dates. One of them played a lullaby, someone's voice, soft and clear. We're having it analyzed. But I bet my badge it was your wife. Miles turned away, tears streaming silently down his face. She kept her safe, even in hell. We'll need your statement again, Riley said, and we'll keep you updated. But for now, go be with your daughter. She needs you. Miles nodded and left without another word. Back at the hospital, he returned to Clara's side. She had been moved to a private room, her small form curled beneath a blanket, and 4 in her arm. Her breathing was more even now, and when he entered, her eyes fluttered open. Daddy, she whispered, voice hoarse. You found me. I never stopped looking, he said, taking her hand. Not for a second. She began to cry then, quietly, the sound breaking his heart into pieces. Mommy's gone, she said through tears. The bad man, he said she was too tired, that she had to sleep. Miles held her close, brushing her hair gently. She's not gone, baby. She's with us, always. In your heart. In mine. She told me to be brave, Clara said. She said you would find us. Miles nodded, his voice thick with emotion. And I did. Because she believed. Because she made sure you held on. And now it's our turn to live for her, to never let her memory fade. They stayed like that for a long time, father and daughter, holding onto each other in a world that had almost taken everything from them. But it hadn't. Lila's courage had kept Clara alive. And now, Miles would make sure that courage would never be forgotten. The following days in Harborsend unfolded like a fog drifting slowly across the sea, thick, heavy, and difficult to navigate. Miles Harper remained by Clara's side, rarely leaving her hospital room except to meet briefly with detectives, doctors, or to shower and change clothes in the nearby family lodging facility. Clara, though physically healing, was quiet and distant. She often stared at the ceiling or into the distance, her small fingers fidgeting with the edges of her blanket. She spoke little and asked for her mother often, but she didn't cry much, at least not in front of Miles. She seemed to be conserving her strength, as though a part of her understood that letting go would risk crumbling altogether. One afternoon, as golden sunlight spilled through the hospital windows, Dr. Morgan, the trauma psychologist, sat beside Clara while Miles watched from a corner. The doctor had a gentle voice and carried a soft toy in her bag that she offered Clara, a small plush dolphin. Clara took it and held it close, though she didn't say anything. "Clara," Dr. Morgan said kindly, "do you remember when you were at the lighthouse? Or the place with the wooden walls and the boat?" Clara nodded faintly. "Did someone hurt you there?" Another nod. "Did Mommy try to protect you?" A third nod, followed by a soft whisper. "She gave me the bigger blanket when it got cold." Miles clenched his jaw to hold back tears. "She sang to me," Clara added, barely audible. "She said not to be afraid. She said Daddy would find us." Later that evening, Miles sat with Officer Riley in the station's quiet briefing room. A board had been set up in the corner with photos, evidence tags, and timelines. It resembled a crime drama set, only this one was real and horrifyingly personal. "We've completed a background search on Malcolm Vire," Riley began, "and what we found paints a much darker picture." He handed Miles a thick file. "He was a maritime engineer, as we suspected. Worked on offshore structures and lighthouses, even helped design storm-resistant ferry routes. But 15 years ago, his wife and daughter died in a ferry accident. One he helped design." "Guilt?" Miles asked. "More than that," Riley said. "He blamed the world. His writings reveal a philosophy where he believes mothers are chaotic by nature and children are pure. He believed his role was to preserve that purity by creating what he called perfect sanctuaries. By kidnapping families?" Miles said bitterly. "By holding them prisoner?" "Yes," Riley replied. "He thought he was rescuing them from society, from time, from loss. We're working with FBI profilers now. They call it delusional reconstruction. It's rare, but not unheard of in people with untreated trauma and severe narcissism." Miles stood, pacing. How did he find them? These other women and children. He scouted small coastal towns, places like Harborsend, places with weak enforcement and transient populations. He'd pose as a friendly neighbor or a guide. Sometimes he offered help to stranded boaters. That's likely how he intercepted Lila and Clara after the storm. "And no one ever suspected?" Miles asked, stunned. He kept to himself. Paid in cash. Used fake names when needed. He was methodical. He only surfaced in town for supplies. The man lived in isolation and obscurity by design. Riley flipped to another page. "We also uncovered property he secretly purchased on Sealbone Island. Satellite images show recent construction, another compound, likely his next sanctuary. That's where he was planning to move your wife and daughter permanently." Before Rory saw Clara, Miles said. "Exactly," Riley nodded. "That sighting pushed everything forward. We believe he panicked and decided to relocate early, which is why he was at the inlet boathouse when we found him. If you and Rory hadn't followed that lead," he let the sentence hang. "The implications were clear. They might never have found Clara. Or worse, they might have found her too late." "What happens to him now?" Miles asked. "He's being charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, murder, and abuse of a corpse. The DA is pursuing life without parole. His attorney may argue for an insanity plea, but given the amount of planning, the journals, and the staged photographs, that likely won't fly." Riley's voice grew firm. He knew what he was doing, and now he'll never do it again. That night, back at the hospital, Miles sat beside Clara's bed, reading to her from her favorite book, a story about a lighthouse keeper and a girl who helps him light the way. The irony was not lost on him. When he paused, Clara looked up at him, her eyes more focused than they had been in days. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart." "Why did the bad man keep us?" Miles took a breath. "Because he was sick. He believed wrong things. But you were brave. And Mommy was the bravest of all." Clara clutched the dolphin plush tighter. "Mommy said I had to stay quiet. She said if I made noise, the bad man would get angry." "She protected you, Clara," Miles said, brushing a hand through her hair. "She gave everything to keep you safe." "She said you would come," Clara whispered. "And you did." Miles bent down and kissed her forehead. "I will always come for you." As she drifted to sleep, Miles looked out the window at the dark sea beyond, wondering how many other secrets it still held. But for now, his daughter was safe, and the man who had shattered so many lives was finally behind bars. The nightmare was far from over. There would be years of recovery, of therapy, of learning to live again without Lila. But the nightmare's chapter had at last been closed. Still, every time he looked at Clara's short-cropped hair, or the way she flinched at sudden noises, the echoes of what had happened stirred deep inside him. He would carry that with him forever. But he would also carry something else, Lila's bravery, her strength, her sacrifice. It was written in every breath Clara took. It was woven into the very air Miles now breathed, and it gave him strength to go on. In the days that followed Malcolm Vyer's arrest and the harrowing rescue of Clara Harper, Harborsend slowly returned to a fragile semblance of calm. The headlines faded from the national spotlight, the curious reporters packed up their cameras and left, and the marina once again filled with the ordinary sounds of lapping waves and seagulls overhead. But for Miles Harper, calm was a foreign concept now. His days were spent oscillating between the hospital, where Clara continued to recover physically, and the police station, where he answered follow-up questions, signed legal statements, and met with the lead detectives of the case. He barely slept. Most nights, he paced the small apartment he had rented near the hospital, sifting through Lila's belongings, trying to grasp the surreal horror of what had transpired. But one thing gnawed at him constantly: Sealbone Island. When Officer Riley had mentioned that Malcolm was preparing to relocate his victims to a more remote compound he had been building in secret, it planted a seed in Miles's mind that refused to go dormant. What if there were more clues there? What if there were remnants of Lila and Clara's time he hadn't yet seen, something only a husband and father might recognize? When he brought this up to Riley during a case update meeting, the officer nodded gravely. "We've arranged a forensic team to comb through the property. But it's dense out there, not fully mapped. If you're up for it, I'll authorize you to accompany the team. You have the right, as Clara's father and next of kin to Lila, to be involved in identifying personal effects." Miles agreed without hesitation. 2 days later, under the gray light of early morning, Miles found himself aboard a police boat heading towards Sealbone Island. The wind was brisk and the sea slightly choppy, but the patrol cut steadily through the water. Officer Riley stood beside him, reviewing a file folder, while 2 forensic technicians prepped gear. "He used aliases to buy the land," Riley explained. "Had it registered under a shell company he set up years ago. There's a main cabin, a generator shed, and what looks like a buried structure." The satellite photos showed recent construction and movement, possibly another holding area. Miles didn't respond. He stared straight ahead at the island coming into view, its thick line of trees jagged against the sky. When they docked, a thick hush fell over the group. The land felt untouched, but not in a pristine way. More like it had been forgotten. The main cabin stood at the edge of the tree line, its wooden siding newly built, but already weathered by salt and time. As they approached, Riley unholstered his weapon out of caution, though they had confirmed Malcolm had acted alone. The front door creaked as it opened. revealing a disturbingly clean and orderly interior. Unlike the clutter of the lighthouse and the improvised setup of the boathouse, this space had been purpose-built. 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen with an industrial-grade refrigerator, a single bathroom, and a central living space. Every wall was lined with shelves. On those shelves sat dozens of jars. Some were empty. Others contained mementos, childhood toys, locks of hair, small items of clothing carefully preserved in resin or vacuum-sealed bags. He was preparing, one of the forensic agents murmured, planning for the long haul. Miles moved slowly through the cabin, his eyes scanning the space for anything familiar. In one of the bedrooms, he spotted a folded blanket with a pattern he recognized. A faded cartoon octopus Lila had sewn onto one of Clara's old throws. He reached for it, his fingers trembling. "This was Clara's," he said. "She used to sleep with it during thunderstorms." He carried it into the main room and handed it to the techs, who gently placed it into a labeled evidence bag. "Check the basement," Riley said to the team leader. "If there's a hidden space, I want it opened." They found it behind the pantry. What looked like a supply closet was in fact a hatch leading to a concrete bunker beneath the cabin. A steep staircase led down into darkness. As they descended, the air grew colder, more still. The floor was lined with rubber matting. The walls were reinforced with steel beams. "This isn't a cellar," Riley muttered. "It's a bunker." There were no windows, no natural light, only dim LED bulbs overhead. At the far end were 2 steel cages, empty, but unmistakably built to hold someone. Mattresses were laid on each floor, chains bolted to the wall. "My God," one technician whispered. "He was going to keep them down here." Miles stood frozen, staring at the space. Every inch of it screamed of calculation, of premeditated cruelty. The horror he'd imagined about Lila and Clara's experience was bad enough, but this, the cold, methodical planning of what was to come, was almost worse. "He never got the chance," Riley said, as though reading Miles's mind. "Your wife delayed him long enough. Rory saw Clara at the lighthouse. That bought us time." "He had an entire plan," Miles said, his voice low, "and he would have carried it out. If we'd been a day later," he couldn't finish the thought. Back upstairs, the agents collected more items, journals, maps, architectural sketches, and labeled containers of supplies. In the refrigerator, they found multiple vials of sedatives and medications, some in unlabeled bottles. The implication was clear. Malcolm had been experimenting with dosage, sedation schedules, perhaps even psychological manipulation. Before leaving, Miles walked the perimeter of the property. Behind the cabin, buried under a thick layer of pine needles and dirt, he found a series of shallow holes, some still covered, some left open. Inside one was a plastic container filled with photos. Dozens of them, all taken with a high-end camera, all carefully staged. There were pictures of Lila and Clara, Lila smiling, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion and fear. Clara seated in a chair, holding it all, her posture stiff and unnatural. There were others, women and girls Miles didn't recognize. He handed the container to Riley. "These aren't just trophies," he said. He was building a legacy, a family album. "Not anymore," Riley replied. "He'll never see freedom again." As they sailed back to the mainland, Miles sat in silence, the folded blanket pressed to his chest. The wind was stronger now, the sky darker with incoming clouds. But he felt something in his chest that had been missing for months: clarity. They had found the final piece of the puzzle. Lila had endured something no one should ever face. But she had kept Clara alive. She had stalled a monster. She had held on long enough for Miles to find them. Her sacrifice would never be forgotten, and neither would the truth hidden on Sealbone Island. Weeks passed, and with them came the slow, arduous process of healing. Clara remained in Harborsend Memorial Hospital under constant medical supervision. Though her body was growing stronger by the day, the psychological wounds lingered. She rarely spoke to anyone but Miles and her therapist, Dr. Morgan, and even then her words were sparse, as if each one had to travel through a thicket of memory and fear before escaping her lips. Miles stayed by her side through it all, becoming a constant fixture in the pediatric wing. Nurses brought him coffee without asking, and other families learned to recognize his quiet, worn face as the man who had found his daughter after 8 months of horror. But outside the hospital walls, the town of Harborsend was grappling with a darkness it had never known. Malcolm Vyer's crimes had unearthed not just bodies and secrets, but a collective wound. People asked themselves how such a man could live among them for so long without detection. His trial had been fast-tracked due to the overwhelming evidence and the national attention the case had garnered. The courtroom was moved to the larger county courthouse in nearby Rockmouth to accommodate media, families of other victims, and the legal teams involved. On the day of the arraignment, Miles stood in the back of a courtroom, flanked by Officer Riley and a victim's advocate. He refused to sit. He needed to see Malcolm Vyer with his own eyes, to look at the man who had stolen Lila and nearly taken Clara from him forever. The courtroom murmurs died as Malcolm was escorted in, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed, his expression blank. He looked older somehow, more diminished, like a wax figure melted under a cruel light. He didn't look toward Miles, not once. The charges were read aloud, multiple counts of first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, abuse of a corpse, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. Malcolm stood still through it all, his only words being a plea of not guilty, entered by his court-appointed attorney. It was expected, part of the legal process, but it still made Miles's stomach churn. The trial proper began 2 weeks later. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Forensic photographs of the cooler boxes, DNA matches from the remains, the journal entries, staged photographs, Clara's personal belongings, and witness testimonies from officers, search team members, and the families of other victims. Then came the tapes. The prosecution had decided to play a few segments from Malcolm's journals, audio recordings he had made of himself dictating his philosophy, his plans, and his distorted beliefs. His voice echoed through the courtroom like a whisper from some parallel universe where logic and empathy no longer existed. Time is a thief, Malcolm had said in one recording. It rots everything it touches, love, youth, innocence. But if I preserve them, capture the perfect moment, they never decay. They stay pure, forever. Some people wept openly. Others left the courtroom unable to stomach it. Miles remained. He had to. Clara's face would sometimes flash before his eyes during those recordings, and each time, he would clench his fists and silently promise her again that this man would never touch her or anyone else again. The defense attempted an insanity plea, citing Malcolm's traumatic loss and the psychological breakdown that followed. Their psychiatrist claimed he had suffered from severe delusional disorder compounded by survivor's guilt. But the prosecution had their own experts, who argued Malcolm knew right from wrong, had methodically planned his crimes, and had taken steps to cover them up. This was not the behavior of a man lost in delusion. It was the behavior of a predator. Then, one afternoon, Clara took the stand. It had been her decision. Dr. Morgan and Miles had left it entirely up to her. She had insisted. The court was silent as she was led to the witness box, a tiny figure in a navy dress, her hands clutching the dolphin plush toy she had refused to let go since the hospital. She was 10 now, older than when she had been taken, but the years showed not in height or maturity, but in her eyes. There was a depth there that no child should possess. "Clara," the prosecutor said gently, Can you tell us what you remember about the man who took you?" Clara nodded slowly, her voice quiet but clear. "He said we had to stay quiet. That Mommy was sick and needed to rest. But Mommy wasn't sick. She was scared. I saw her cry when he wasn't looking." Miles sat with his hand over his mouth, fighting back a sob. "Did he ever hurt you?" "Not like hitting," she said. "But he gave us medicine that made me sleepy. He told me not to ask about the radio. He got angry when Mommy asked. He locked her in the dark room sometimes when she argued." "And your mother, what did she do?" Clara's lip trembled. "She gave me her blanket when it was cold. She told me to sing to myself when he left us alone. She told me that Daddy was looking for us. She made me promise not to cry when he was near." The courtroom was silent save for the sound of her small voice. "She said she would protect me," Clara said, a tear rolling down her cheek. "And she did." The judge recessed the court early that day. Clara's testimony had pierced something deeper than any evidence could. It was the raw voice of innocence, enduring horror and surviving. When the verdict finally came, no one doubted the outcome. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Malcolm Vire to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, to be served consecutively in a maximum security facility. As the gavel struck, Miles felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, grief, exhaustion, and a profound sense of finality. It was over. Not the healing, not the grief, but the fight. Justice, as much as it could be, had been served. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Miles and Clara as they exited. He shielded her, answering only one question before leading her to their waiting car. "What now, Mr. Harper?" someone shouted. Miles paused, looking down at his daughter, her small hand still in his. "We go home," he said. "And we live. For Lila. For the ones who didn't make it. We live." That night, in their temporary apartment, Clara asked for a bedtime story. It was the first time she had since the hospital. Miles retrieved the old picture book about the lighthouse keeper, the one they used to read together when she was younger. As he read, Clara drifted to sleep, her breathing calm, the dolphin plush nestled beside her. Miles sat in the quiet, staring out the window at the ocean, the same ocean that had taken so much, but had also, finally, brought something back. Peace would come slowly, but it had begun. In the weeks following Malcolm Vire's conviction, Miles Harper turned his full attention to helping Clara heal, not just from what she had endured, but from everything that had changed in the world around her. He moved them into a small, cozy rental house nestled near the edge of Harborsend, far from the marina and even farther from the inlet channels that had once been a place of hope but now echoed too loudly with memories. The house had 2 bedrooms and a small garden in the back, and every night Miles left the hallway light on for Clara, just the way Lila used to. Clara started attending therapy 3 times a week. Dr. Morgan continued to be a guiding force in her recovery, introducing carefully structured sessions designed to help Clara vocalize her trauma in ways that didn't re-traumatize her. Art therapy became a lifeline. Clara, who rarely used words to describe what had happened, began to draw. Her early sketches were dark cages, closed doors, a boat floating in water surrounded by storm clouds. But over time, colors returned. There were pictures of a lighthouse with its beacon shining, of a woman with long dark hair hugging a small blonde girl, of a man standing on a dock holding a rope tied to a boat. Miles kept every single drawing. He pinned them up in her room, letting her see her own journey in colors and shapes that spoke volumes. But it wasn't easy. Some nights Clara would wake up screaming, lost in the grasp of a nightmare she couldn't escape. Other nights she would cry silently, curled in a ball on the floor of her closet, saying she didn't feel safe with the walls too far apart. Miles never pushed. He only knelt beside her, held her, and whispered that she was home, that the bad man was gone, that she was safe now. Slowly, routines emerged. Mornings started with warm oatmeal and cocoa, a tradition they had shared before the storm, before Lila had vanished from their lives. Afternoons were filled with gentle homeschooling sessions. Miles working with a retired teacher who volunteered to help bridge the academic gap Clara had missed. Evenings were for stories, familiar books with kind heroes and happy endings. But amidst this fragile new normal, there were reminders, both comforting and painful. One morning, Clara pulled open an old storage box that had once been Lila's and discovered her mother's scarf, the one she used to wear on early spring walks through the town. Clara clutched it to her chest and didn't speak for the rest of the day, but that night she brought it to bed, wrapped it around her dolphin plush, and whispered to it until she fell asleep. Miles watched from the doorway, his heart cracking and swelling at the same time. For himself, the grief came in waves. He often caught himself setting 2 plates instead of 1, reaching for his phone to text Lila before remembering, standing by the washing machine and staring at her favorite cardigan, unable to bring himself to wash away her scent. He kept a journal now, not unlike the ones Malcolm had filled, though his was a mirror of its purpose. Where Malcolm had written to preserve a fantasy, Miles wrote to process a reality. He wrote letters to Lila, telling her about Clara's progress, about how she smiled more now, about the day she laughed at the joke in a cartoon, about how she hummed one of the lullabies again without realizing it. He wrote about the trial, about the blanket they had found on Sealbone Island, about the picture Clara had drawn of the 3 of them on a boat with the sun shining overhead. In these letters, Miles found a kind of tether, a way to hold on to Lila without drowning in the ache of her absence. Occasionally, Officer Riley would stop by the house. Sometimes it was official, a follow-up report, a piece of recovered property returned, or an update from the lab about DNA matches from the other victims. Other times, it was personal. Riley had become more than just the officer assigned to their case. He had become a friend, a quiet guardian of their peace. One afternoon, he brought news that another mother and daughter pair, missing for over 5 years from a small village in Maine, had been identified through items recovered from Malcolm's Sealbone compound. "They have closure now," Riley said. "Like you." But Miles shook his head. "Closure's not what I have," he said softly. "I have a new beginning. That's different." As spring bloomed across Harborsend, the community began to shift too. People who had once looked away now reached out. The local school held a fundraiser in Clara's honor to support trauma therapy for other children. The library hosted a memorial reading for Lila, where Miles read aloud her favorite poem to a room full of townspeople, some of whom wept openly. Even Doug, the bartender at the Silver Anchor, gave up a wall of the tavern to hang a framed photo of Lila with the inscription, "She braved the storm." But the most pivotal moment came when Clara, during one of her therapy sessions, quietly asked if she could go see the Lighthouse. Dr. Morgan called Miles that afternoon to relay the request. "Only if she's ready," she said. "And only if you are." Miles took a long breath. "If Clara wants to go," he said, "then we go." On a calm, sunny Saturday, they boarded a boat together, just the 2 of them. The patrol vessel was quiet, its captain a friend of Rory's who had volunteered to help. As the lighthouse came into view, its stone tower standing tall against the sky, Clara held tight to Miles's hand. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. But her grip tightened as they stepped onto the dock. They didn't go inside. That wasn't necessary. Instead, they stood at the edge of the pier, letting the wind play with Clara's hair. She held the scarf she had wrapped around her plush, now knotted like a bandana around her neck. "Mommy stood here," she said. She waved. Miles nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "And I'll always see her here," he said. Clara looked up at the lighthouse, then at the water, then back at her father. "We're okay now," she said. "Aren't we?" "We're getting there," Miles said. "One day at a time." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small shell, one she had found on the shore behind their new house. Without a word, she stepped forward and dropped it into the sea. A quiet offering, a goodbye. As they sailed back toward Harborsend, the lighthouse slowly faded behind them, its silhouette growing smaller with every passing minute. Miles wrapped his arm around Clara's shoulder. She leaned into him, eyes closed, her breathing calm. For the first time in a long while, the sea felt like home again. The summer that followed Clara's return was unlike any season Miles Harper had ever known. It was not marked by beach trips or fireworks, or the usual small-town parades that had once filled the streets of Harborsend with music and laughter. Instead, it was a summer of quiet rebuilding, of fragile steps forward, of days spent in sun-dappled stillness, and nights wrapped in the soft weight of memory. Clara continued to grow stronger, not only in body, but in spirit. She resumed school part-time in the fall, attending a hybrid learning program that allowed her to ease back into a classroom setting while still receiving therapy and support. The first day she walked into the local community center, wearing her dolphin-patterned backpack and the scarf she had tied around her neck like a brave little adventurer. Miles fought the urge to cry in front of the other parents. The room wasn't crowded, but it was full of knowing eyes. And when Clara reached back to squeeze his hand before letting go and walking to her desk, he felt something shift in his chest, a quiet pride, but also something deeper. A realization that they were surviving, one day at a time, just like he had promised her. Their evenings settled into rituals again. After dinner, they would walk along the harbor where Lila once loved to stroll, watching boats drift in as the sun dipped below the waterline. Clara often brought her sketchbook, drawing the waves, the lighthouse in the distance, the seagulls perched on the docks. Miles sometimes brought his journal, writing letters to Lila, still, though now they were more like updates than grief-filled confessions. Clara smiled today at a joke I made about the fish market. She rolled her eyes like you used to. I could see you in her completely. She asked me today if we could get a dog. I said maybe. You'd have said yes. He wrote these things not because he needed to keep her alive. Lila was already woven into every breath they took, but because writing helped him understand the shape of life without her. It wasn't empty. It was altered, and somehow, in its altered state, still capable of beauty. One weekend, Rory Delgado invited them to join him and his wife for a fishing trip, the kind Clara once would have begged to go on with her mother. They hesitated at first, unsure if the sea would bring more pain than peace, but eventually, Clara said yes. "I think Mommy would like that," she said. She always said the ocean was for healing. The trip was a quiet success. Clara fished alongside Rory, who was patient and warm, telling stories about sea creatures that lived only in local legends. When she finally reeled in a small snapper, her face lit up with a pride that made Miles snap a photo he would later frame and hang in the living room. For the first time in many months, her laughter rang out over the water, clear and unguarded. After the trip, Clara gave the fish a name, Captain Bubbles, and asked if they could release him instead of cooking him. Rory laughed and agreed. "Every sailor needs a story," he said, "and every fish deserves one too." As the season shifted and the trees began to bronze and whisper the first secrets of autumn, Clara made another request that caught Miles off guard. "I want to speak at the memorial," she said one evening, her voice steady. Harborsend was preparing to unveil a monument in memory of the victims of Malcolm Vire, a simple stone circle by the cliff's edge, inscribed with names, surrounded by a garden of wildflowers native to the coast. Miles had been invited to say a few words, but Clara hadn't been expected to participate. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said. "I want people to remember Mommy. And the others. Not just what happened, but who they were." The day of the memorial was cool and clear, the sky a washed-out blue that seemed to stretch endlessly over the cliffs. A modest crowd gathered, families of the other victims, townspeople, officers like Riley and Livenson, even Dr. Morgan and the staff from the hospital. Miles stood with Clara as the mayor gave a short speech, followed by Officer Riley's reflections on the case. When Clara was called up, there was a murmur of surprise, but then complete silence. She stepped up to the small podium, holding a folded piece of paper in one hand and the dolphin plush in the other. "My name is Clara Harper," she began, "and I am here because of my mom. Her name was Lila. She was brave and funny and always sang me songs when I couldn't sleep. When we were taken, she protected me every day, even when she was scared, even when she was tired. She told me to believe that someone would find us. And she was right." She looked out at the crowd, her voice unwavering. "I don't want to talk about the man who hurt us. I want to talk about the people who helped. My dad, Officer Riley, Rory, the people who didn't give up. Because bad things happen, but good people are stronger. My mom believed that, and I do too." When she stepped down, the crowd stood in a hushed, reverent silence. Then, one by one, people began to applaud, not loudly, but warmly, respectfully. Miles embraced her, tears in his eyes. "She would be so proud," he whispered. "She is," Clara replied. "She's still with us." They placed a shell Clara had painted at the base of the monument, a simple blue spiral with Lila's initials written in silver. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, Miles felt something lift inside him, a sense of completion. Not closure, the loss of Lila would always ache, but a chapter had ended. The fear, the searching, the unanswered questions, they were now part of the past. Later that night, back home, Miles tucked Clara into bed. She had begun sleeping without the hallway light now, though the dolphin plush still had a permanent place beside her pillow. "Good night, Daddy," she murmured. "Good night, sweetheart," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I love you." "I love you too," she said. "To the lighthouse and back." He smiled, turned off the lamp, and stepped out into the hallway. The house was quiet, but not heavy, just peaceful. He walked to the window and looked out over Harborsend, where the ocean breathed against the land in rhythmic waves. Somewhere far out, past the invisible curve of the horizon, the lighthouse stood tall against the dark, its beacon sweeping across the sea, no longer a symbol of fear, but of guidance, of survival, of light after the storm. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life inspired mysteries. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop a comment and let us know. And if you believe in hope, healing, and light after darkness, type "God bless Clara" in the comments below.